The Robodebt scheme was a failure of government. The public service takes responsibility for the part it played.
That's Public Service Commissioner Gordon de Brouwer talking about the Robodebt scheme. It's one of the darkest chapters in modern Australian political history. And today we found out that a dozen current and former senior public servants involved in the unlawful scheme breached their code of conduct. Here with more from Canberra is federal politics reporter Ellen Ransley. Okay, Ellen, before we get into today's news, can you give us a quick recap on the Robodebt scheme and why it became such a big controversy?
Hey Ben, how are you going? So yes, Robodebt, as you said, was found to be an unlawful scheme that impacted hundreds of thousands of Australians. So basically what it was, it existed under the former coalition government for a period of about 4 years, and basically automated debts to Social Security recipients were issued based on what has now been found to be unlawful income averaging calculations. So it actually was linked to a number of suicides, and then we had this Royal Commission that wrapped up last year. And coming out of the Royal Commission, one of the courses of actions that were taken was to look into the role of a select number of public servants. So as we mentioned, 12 public servants have now been found to have breached their code of conduct. We only know the identities of 2 of those, and they are former department heads Catherine Campbell and Renee Leon. Catherine Campbell was Secretary of the Department of Human Services from, I think it was 2011 to 2017, and Miss Leon was her successor. And so that's what we found out today.
And what do we know about, when we say they breached their code of conduct, what does that mean? What do we know about their role in this?
I'll break it down. So 6 findings were made against Miss Campbell, and she was found to have breached the Australian Public Service Code of Conduct on 12 occasions. And that included a failure to, quote unquote, sufficiently respond to public criticism, and for also having, quote, created and allowed a culture that kept issues from being considered. I think it's also worth noting that there had been some allegations that Miss Campbell had misled the cabinet, among a couple of other allegations. Those weren't substantiated, but there were 6 findings on account of 12 different breaches. And then Miss Leon, there were 4 findings made against her for 13 breaches of code of conduct. So the inquiry found she'd failed to, quote, expeditiously inform her minister and colleagues of Solicitor General advice on the lawfulness of the scheme, and had failed to stop the practice. Now, I will note Ms. Leon, who's now Vice-Chancellor at Charles Sturt University, has come out with a statement, and she stands by her actions. She said she acted as expeditiously as possible after receiving advice from the Solicitor General to convince the government, and she notes that the government was, quote, wedded to the Robodebt program. So she's trying to shift the blame back onto the former coalition government, and said, you know, when they delayed, I directed it to be stopped, and then I was fired, ultimately, is what she said. So, it's pretty significant what's come out today.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I can't help but draw a comparison to those commanders in Afghanistan that had their medals stripped, and then, you know, sort of, who do we point the finger at when these things happen? You know, is it the top of the pyramid, the people ultimately in charge who have all the responsibility? Is it their underlings? Is it the rank and file? It's a debate that I think is very interesting to have. But as you mentioned, Ellen, like, this was a scheme, a heartless scheme that incorrectly calculated debts and led to people's suicides. Is there any consequences for this finding today of these public servants who breached their code of conduct?
Well, because neither Miss Campbell or Miss Leon are employed by the Australian Public Service anymore, there's no sanctions for them. Basically, if they try and become contractors for the APS in the next 5 years, they'll have to declare. There's the other 10 unnamed public servants, and I will say that there is some controversy, some backlash still lingering about the fact that we don't know the identity of these other 10 unnamed public servants who have now found to have breached, you know, the code of conduct, and clearly had a role to play in this. So of those 10, 4 of them are current public servants, And the Commissioner said today that there's been a range of sanctions recommended for them, including reprimands, fines, and demotions. But, there is kind of an element of we don't really know what's going to happen. Those identities were, of course, contained within the sealed section of the initial Robodebt Royal Commission. Bill Shorten, as Government Services Minister, has said in the past that he would, like for that section to be released publicly eventually. So I think there's still a bit of a fight going on in the background about when that might happen, if at all.
And so is this the end of the Robodebt scandal?
I think there are still some matters before the National Anti-Corruption Commission, but other than that, I'm not sure where else there is to go on this.
Yeah, it just keeps coming back. It's such a dark moment in the nation's history that there's always more to unearth. Unfortunately, federal politics reporter Ellen Ransley, we really appreciate your time on the Nightly Five today.
Thanks, Ben.